It was a good book. It was clearly his last book that he was working on. He talks about working on another book, but I don't believe it was published before he passed away. Um, I believe he finished the book, The Road Less Traveled and Beyond, about 5 years before he died. This is M. Scott Peck. Anyway, it was a good book. There were parts of it that were repetitive if you had read his other books, if you had read The Road Less Traveled, and if you had read The People of the Lie, and if you had read some of his intermediate books, some of his fictional works and stuff like that. Um, he did talk about a lot of really interesting stuff. He got into systems theory a little bit, which is a very interesting concept, and I had heard it vaguely, but not nearly as clearly put as he put it. And I really enjoyed that, and it made a lot of sense, and it gave me some light bulb moments as far as different situations I'd been in, different systems I'd been a part of, and why I didn't fit and why it wasn't right, and why those systems either broke down, or why those systems drove me out, or why I couldn't be in those systems, or whatever reason it was. But the systems theory was very, very interesting. He also talked a little more in depth. So in the first two books, he talked about narcissism briefly. In this book, it was almost as if he had solidified his personal views on narcissism. And narcissism for me is something that's, I want to know the answers to the questions that I have about it. Because I've been called a narcissist by my wife and a lot of other people. Because of all of that, I wanted to know, am I really a narcissist? And Scott Peck had a very interesting viewpoint on that, where he said, we're all born narcissists, and the depth to which we remain, and we spend the rest of our lives growing out of it, basically. So we're all born narcissists, and we spend the rest of our lives growing out of it by a mixture of things, becoming more self-aware, working very, very hard to be less selfish, to gain empathy, to be able to use the tools that more well-adjusted people naturally come by. But he said a very, very important part is when you're a kid, the level of narcissism that you will grow up with and be left with is directly proportional to the amount that you were humiliated as a child by caregivers, by important people, by people that were close to you. And that really hit home, because in the situation that I grew up in the place that I grew up in, all that stuff, there were so many times when I was humiliated in the deepest ways, and when those things were never repaired. Not necessarily by my parents. My dad made sure there was a fair share of that from my dad. My mom never did that to me. But this would be more deeper humiliations had come from people outside of me, outside of the family group. But there was also that seed of humiliation from the time I was a kid, through the formative years, through the 5 and 7 year old years, through the 2 to 5 years. I think I remember as far back as about 3 to 4 years old, as I look back on it and that viewpoint. But there were also people that were given access to my life because of the way I grew up, where I grew up, where there was a lot of other humiliation that came in and made me turn inside, and also made me replicate what I saw around me: a lack of empathy, a lack of understanding for other people, a lack of selflessness, because anytime I reached out or was selfless, it either got taken away or it backfired, or I got in trouble for it, or whatever it was. Whatever it is when you're a kid and you're rationalizing why something happened. And then you grow up with those belief systems in place. Anyway, so that was a very interesting take on narcissism, because there's been a lot of talk about, oh, this person's a narcissist and that person's a narcissist. The truth is that there's only really 1% of the population that are true narcissists, and I don't think I'm that special. I don't think I fit in, and I've been working extremely hard for the past 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 12, however many years. Depends on where you want to start looking at the journey as self-awakening or self-awareness. But I've been working extremely hard to become more compassionate, to become more selfless, to become more empathetic, to view others as individuals separate from myself. And I know, based off of objective sources around me that see me, that I have made progress and that I continue to learn and I continue to make progress. And the goal is to do that, is to continue making that progress. Another thing he talked about was he got deep in the religious side of things, which toward the end of his life, he was facing death. He talked about the idea of getting to the place where you accept death and dying, to be able to die gracefully. And I am not, of natural causes, I am not there, but I don't think it is a bad idea for me to spend a little time getting used to the idea that there will come a time when I am not capable and I am not able to muscle my way through everything and think my way through everything and do all that. I think it is very valuable to take the lesson that he's teaching in the book, not just as an older person being faced with the idea of death and dying, but as a younger person, a young-ish person. Hopefully I'm not going to die soon. I mean, maybe I am, and I don't have really any regrets. I've made peace as far as I'm concerned. I have made peace with everything and everyone that I know of that I need to. But the idea of coming to grips with the inevitability of death, it's going to happen. That's just the way it is. That idea and that lesson that he was teaching there was very, very interesting. And I have a friend who has not only accepted it, but feels like he is done with life. And I understand that after reading this book, but it also breaks my heart because there's so much more that he could offer if he could see it. But he's got lots of stuff, as we all do, that drive him to think and be the way that he is. But what I love about it is that he has accepted the idea of death and dying. He is not afraid of it. He understands it. He accepts it, and he's made peace with it, or is making peace with it. And I thought that was a very interesting lesson to take away. And I thought that was an extremely good point. He did talk a lot about classifying different people in their different stages of spiritual growth, which I don't know. I don't really buy into that as much. I think you can be in all the stages that he mentioned at once. I don't necessarily think it is a set thing where you're in stage 1 or you're in stage 2 or you're in stage 3 or you're in stage 4. I do think his observations of people in spiritual growth transition were correct. I'm not saying that. I'm not discounting his observational ability and his categorizational ability, I guess. I'm not questioning that. I would stay away from Personally, I would stay away from classifying people that way because I have spent so much time classifying and categorizing people into, well, this person is the way they are because of this, and they are at level 4 of maturity in my eyes in this. So I don't do it to discount what he's saying or the observations he's made, but more to keep myself from judging other people, which I don't think he was judging other people, but I can find myself tending to judge other people. Anyway, he's not a poet. He did write the last 20 pages or so in verse, but it's not poetry. He said that it was going to be poetry, and again, this is me. This could be an example of me judging people. I grew up in a very literate, very literature-loving family and house. There was a lot of encouragement to read well above your age, well above your maturity level to understand and to learn and to get a different perspective. And poetry was a big part of that. And it was not poetry, what he was writing. It was verse, but it was prose, and it was just fragmented thoughts, basically, which does not make poetry. Anyway, so the last 20 pages were really short to read, but difficult for me to take. All of that being said, the body of work that this man put out at the time that he put it out, and the issues that he was addressing that were going virtually unaddressed, I would say he was one of a few major players in broadening the scope of what people accept as mainstream topics that can be talked about. I really enjoyed the 3 books. I think I chose the 3 books. He talks about community a lot in it, which his definition of community is much different than the community I grew up in. And he goes over mistakes that communities make, and how the pitfalls that communities that aren't true communities can fall into in an effort to look like a true community. And that was very interesting. That was definitely worth reading. And that was toward the very end, last 40 pages or so. But yeah, he talks about community. I did not read his book on community that he wrote. I think that's called A Different Drum. If you want to read that, you're welcome to read that. Obviously, you can do whatever you want, but I didn't do that because I felt like I had plenty of experience with community. Having said that, I might end up going back and reading that because it seems like his definition and what he strove to do with FCE, which was his community encouragement group, what he strove to do with that was, I think, a little bit cleaner and purer than what I grew up in. There was less, seems like there was less politics or fewer politics or whatever, and more emphasis on growing and learning as individuals so that the community can grow and learn, which is extremely important and different from what I experienced. Anyway, all of that to say, I thought that this book was very good. It kind of recapped the other 2 books that I read, and it's definitely worth a read. There are nuggets in there that are not in the other books. He doesn't get as much into the personal examples from his practice. He had been 13 years out of personal practice, so I can understand where he wouldn't have ready principles to illustrate his points. And some of it was a little bit too religious for me. I don't like religious literature per se. It feels like it's trying too hard. But I did feel like it was very good and is definitely worth a read. Yeah, and again, just active reading. So take what you can out of it and learn and grow as you can from it.